Good morning. Thanks for joining us on this Friday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Valerie Castro in for Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, catastrophic. A tragic end to a days-long search for that missing Titanic tourist vessel. The Coast Guard concluding that the Titan imploded based on debris found on the ocean floor. Now loved ones are mourning the 5 people on board presumed dead from the implosion.
I can only imagine what this has been like for them, and I hope that this discovery provides some solace during this difficult time.
This morning, growing questions about what happened and who is to blame. We have team coverage of the investigation just ahead. Dinner and diplomacy, a renewed partnership between the world's 2 biggest democracies. This morning, India's prime minister is waking up in Washington after being hosted by President Biden for a rare state dinner. More on the efforts to strengthen ties despite criticism. Also ahead, crisis of hate. A first-of-its-kind report is exposing a troubling trend. Hundreds of incidents against the LGBTQ+ community in just a matter of months. We'll break down the findings, the implications, and ways to show support. And spur of the moment, a new era of basketball has arrived this morning. French phenom Victor Wembanyama is now a San Antonio Spur, the top overall pick in the NBA draft. We'll bring you highlights from last night. Plus, hoop dreams, now reality for an aspiring lawyer who found a loophole that brought him all the way to Barclays. We heard from him yesterday. He was excited.
He was excited. He didn't get drafted, but I think still had a good time.
It has a good story to tell. We begin with the growing questions this morning over the tragic loss of the Titan Submersible in the North Atlantic.
After a 4-day search, debris from the vessel was discovered just 1,600 feet away from the Titanic's wreckage. All 5 people on board are presumed dead. The Coast Guard believes the vessel was lost on Sunday. A U.S. Navy analysis of acoustic data had detected noises that sounded like an implosion or explosion near the Titan at the same time.
We found 5 different major pieces of debris that told us that it was the remains of the Titan.
The debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. It is a difficult day for all of us, and it's especially difficult for the families, and our thoughts are with the families.
The announcement came just hours after experts predicted the Titan's air supply had likely run out. In just a moment, we're going to talk with NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos about the possible legal ramifications from this. But let's start with NBC News correspondent Ron Allen in St. John's, Newfoundland in Canada. Ron, good morning. So first of all, what more do we know about how they found this debris, and where does the investigation stand right now?
Well, there are a number of variables that were put together to locate. Of course, they knew the destination of the submersible, the Titanic wreckage. They knew when they lost communications, which was an hour and 45 minutes or so into the voyage, so they knew the trajectory. There's about a 2 to 2.5 hour descent to the wreckage. As you mentioned, we understand now that the U.S. Navy, with the use of some underwater detectors, sensors, heard an explosion or implosion at some point. But the key variable also seems to be the arrival of these remotely operated vehicles, which are described as magic-like robots, which are huge pieces of equipment that work on the ocean floor, primarily in the oil and gas and exploration industry. They also lay telecom lines. Once those pieces of equipment arrived on the scene, it took a couple of days. That's how they were able to find the wreckage, and that's how they were able to find this debris field that led them to exactly where it was. Now, of course, the question is, why did this happen? What happened? It's a very complicated investigation because you have a number of countries involved. The United States, Canada, France sent some equipment as well. And all of this happened out in international waters where there are frankly few rules, few laws, and that's one reason we believe that this expedition happened out there, because this company, the CEO, Stockton Rush, was a bit of an adventurer, was a big adventurer, and did this almost in defiance of the regulatory agencies that want to keep an eye on this kind of extreme tourism, this extreme exploration.
Yeah, Ron, let's talk about what's next in this process after this tragic conclusion. First, are they going to try and retrieve the debris? And second, more along the lines of what you were just talking about, is there any talk about if this is going to lead to changes in the way these companies are allowed to operate?
They're trying to map the debris field now is what they said. That's the first thing they're trying to do to figure out exactly where everything is. And of course, the area is well mapped with the Titanic wreckage as well. But most of the rescue vehicles have come back or are heading back to port. There were questions asked about whether they would be trying to retrieve remains, and basically the answer to that is that it seems unlikely that there is, frankly, much to be recovered. The debris, there are a number of big pieces, but the question is who will pay for that? Whether the company, OceanGate will now try to pay for and launch an operation to retrieve that material, or not. It seems that the United States government, the Coast Guard, the Canadian government, of course, is a partner in all this as well. So a lot of that is up in the air. And whether this will put more pressure on this industry, obviously, there are a lot of questions being raised about why this sort of thing is happening and what the rules were and what the rules and laws should be.
All right, Ron Allen reporting from Canada. Ron, thank you.
NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt spoke with U.S. Coast Guard Rear Admiral John Mauger about how they found the Titan and the next steps in the investigation.
Joining me now is U.S. Coast Guard Rear Admiral John Mauger. Admiral, have you seen the images of the wreckage? Can you describe them to us and what they suggest about the end?
Lester, good evening. And you know, this has been a really difficult day for all of us here. But first and foremost, our thoughts are with the family members of the crews and the anguish that they must be experiencing at this point. We put the remote operated vehicle in the water this morning, and then we're able to get images back from it. And what, in consultation with the experts, what we observed was catastrophic damage to the submersible there with no chance of survival.
What can you tell us about the timetable and what this says? Do you believe the implosion likely occurred on Sunday during its initial descent?
Well, it's still too early for me to answer that right now at this point. We're working very hard to figure out the timetable. From what we observed, though, we understand that this was a catastrophic implosion, and that would have generated a pressure wave. And we didn't hear any of that throughout the whole search when we had sonar buoys in the water. And so we're continuing to use data and information to look at that and understand.
Admiral Mauger, thank you for spending time with us. We appreciate it.
Our thanks
Thank you, Lester.
Our thanks to Lester for that interview. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savallo. So, Danny, let's talk about what are the legal consequences here when you take part in something that is clearly a high-risk activity and then something goes wrong. Can anyone be held legally responsible?
Well, first, anytime you undertake any kind of activity and you put people on your vessel, whether it's a car, a bus, or anything else, you may be liable if you're negligent. But the key here may be actually twofold. Number one, did these folks sign releases? And just because you sign releases doesn't mean they're always enforceable. I have actually challenged releases, and I've had them overturned in my own cases. So they're not airtight. A defendant can't absolve himself of all liability imaginable, especially if they partook in or were reckless in allowing this hazard to exist. The other thing that has to be considered in a case like this is that both the U.S. and Canada have maritime laws that strictly limit liability in the shipping context for personal injury. I've also had this come up. I practice in the Virgin Islands where there are boating accidents all the time. And strangely enough, these statutes often limit liability by the gross tonnage of the vessel. Now, the Titan itself would be in the lowest category. That'd be 1 million Canadian dollars, do the math, but the 1 million for that lowest level. But you might be able to get liability on the Polar Prince, which is the ship, the mothership that accompanied the Titan. And that would be in a slightly higher category, around 5 million. But look, the point is that we have laws both in the U.S. and Canada that very strictly limit the liability of the shipping industry. A lot of them started back in the 1800s when the shipping industry was king. So they probably had the influence to enact this legislation or push for this legislation that very, very much protects them.
Danny, you touched on the waivers that may have been signed acknowledging the risk. Is there any wiggle room there if they knowingly signed these documents for families to file any sort of lawsuit?
It depends on the language of the waiver and also the jurisdiction where that waiver is interpreted. It could be Canada, not likely going to be in the U.S. But, for example, different states have enacted different laws that protect people from releases. Everything from the font size, for example. If you put your release in 9-point font, depending on the jurisdiction, that alone might be a reason to challenge it. But the reality is this. If you sign a release, the default position is that that release will release the defendant from liability unless there's some extenuating circumstances, unless the defendant did something particularly egregious.
We've heard, of course, some of the safety concerns people had over this submersible. Could manufacturers come under the legal microscope here real quickly?
Yes, that would be a products liability case where a manufacturer or a designer, those are two different things, places something into the stream of commerce. Now, these cases can hold a lot of people liable, but they are very difficult to prove. You talk to the average plaintiff's attorney, and they're usually not that interested in products liability cases because you have to get discovery of all the design documents, all the manufacturing documents in the history of this vessel, and that might be very difficult. In a case like this, it's an investment that a plaintiff's firm, I expect, would be willing to make. And that's assuming, by the way, I'm using U.S. standards. It may not be the same analysis under Canadian law, specifically Canadian personal injury law and Canadian maritime law.
All right, Danny Savalos. Danny, thank you so much.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi wraps up his state visit to Washington today. President Biden rolled out the red carpet for Modi, highlighting a new partnership between the world's two largest democracies. The Bidens hosted the Indian Prime Minister in a rare state dinner, capping a full day of diplomacy that also included Modi addressing a joint session of Congress. For more, we're joined by NBC News Digital senior White House reporter Peter Nicholas. Peter, good morning. Peter, the president pulled out all the stops here. Why was this visit so important to the administration?
Well, this was quite a charm offensive by President Biden. He needs Modi, he needs India as an ally in the Indo-Pacific region to counter China's influence in particular. The administration would like to see Modi and India be more of a bulwark against China to help resist Chinese economic and military aggressive moves in the area. So that's part of what this dinner was about. But it's also about Russia. The United States would like to see India exert more pressure on Moscow, on Vladimir Putin, to end this war in Ukraine. Modi at present in India has been buying oil from Russia, which helps fuel the Russian war effort. So the meeting was also about that.
The Prime Minister also delivered remarks at the joint session of Congress. How was his message received, and what did he say to lawmakers?
Generally, the message was received very well. There were many Indian-American lawmakers who were in the room, but there were some folks who boycotted. Some liberal lawmakers object to India's practice of discriminating against Muslims in the country, and they were upset about that, decided not to attend. But generally, it was well received. Modi said the relationship between the U.S. and India is a defining partnership of the century. Well, those are the kinds of words that the Biden administration applauds. We want closer ties to India. The Biden administration wants to shore up relations. So generally, again, as you mentioned, all the stops were pulled out for this visit, and the U.S. hopes that it will strengthen ties and friendship between these two countries.
A little bit of what the Prime Minister said last night. Let's take a listen.
We are united by a common vision and by a common destiny. When our partnership progresses, democracy will shine brighter and the world will be a better place.
Peter, in light of what he said over the last year, India has been criticized for taking a neutral position on the war in Ukraine, its ties to Russia, and Prime Minister Modi's record on human rights. Did the White House address those issues?
Well, there was a 2-hour meeting between Modi and President Biden in the White House. We can assume that those issues did come up, that they were addressed. Biden was under a lot of pressure from members of Congress to discuss India's human rights record. So we can assume that that did come up. However, let's keep our eye on the ball here. in the sense that the White House wants Modi's cooperation with respect to Russia and China. I think that's the overriding imperative on the part of the White House, and that's what the state dinner was about. And to the extent that he can win Modi's cooperation, the U.S. will call this a victory.
All right, Peter Nicholas, thanks so much.
Some stormy weather is headed to the East Coast.
Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us now for your morning news now weather. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. We've got some soggy conditions that we're expecting to focus again towards the East Coast over the next couple of days. Doesn't mean we're going to see nonstop rain in some of these places, but it does mean that repeated rounds of showers and some thunderstorms will work through. We've already seen thunderstorms along the Gulf Coast today. We do have a flash flood warning in effect along the Big Bend area. Otherwise, some flood watches in effect too for parts of Florida and extending into Georgia and Alabama here. As we go through the rest of the afternoon and evening hours, we'll likely see these continue. And here's why. That rain continues to work through. We've already got some saturated grounds, and we're going to pick up maybe an additional ½ of an inch in places like Tampa and Jacksonville. A little farther south, focused towards the southern tip of Florida. We could see anywhere from 1 to 2 inches. As we move up a little farther to the north and talk about the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, a couple of spots, again, anywhere from 1 to 2 inches here as we get through the weekend. So umbrella needed. If you live in the Midwest, we'll see some additional rainfall for you too here as we get into the next couple of days. And here's why. This is the first system that we're going to see exiting as we go through the next day or so. That front is going to slowly move towards the East Coast. We've got rounds of heavy rain expected there through the Northeast and New England here as we get into tomorrow. You'll get in on that, but we could also see some stronger storms focused towards parts of the Midwest. We will see the potential for those strong storms today too, but it's a little farther to the west. So focus more towards the Central Plains. The Northern Plains will deal with this. Places like Rapid City and North Platte, you could see some strong wind gusts, some tennis ball sized hail. This will extend too into parts of northern Texas and the Oklahoma Panhandle as well. This is tomorrow. So for your Saturday plans, if you're in Des Moines, Kansas City, St. Louis, just a heads up into the afternoon and even evening hours, you could see some of these stronger storms develop. And once again, the hail is going to be the biggest threat, but all of those hazards are on the table. We'll likely see that severe risk last into the weekend and move a little farther to the east, but the record heat continues in the south, guys. For Texas, we've got showers and storms lasting through Saturday and Sunday for the Northeast. But the West Coast looks great. I think plan your outdoor activities if you live really in the western half of the country by the time we get to Saturday and Sunday.
Let's all just drive west for the
Shall
weekend.
we?
All right.
Road trip.
Good. Thanks, Angie. Appreciate it. As we head into the final weekend of Pride Month, there is troubling new data from the Anti-Defamation League and GLAAD showing the extent of anti-LGBTQ+ hate in the U.S.
The two organizations released a first-of-its-kind report yesterday, and the findings show that between June 2022 and April 2023, there were more than 350 anti-LGBTQ+ hate and extremism incidents recorded nationwide.
Sarah Moore is an anti-LGBTQ+ extremism analyst for the ADL and GLAAD. She joins us now with more on the report. Sarah, good to have you with us. So first of all, let's get a better understanding of just the hate we are talking about here. What are the most common actions reported, and what do the most serious incidents involve?
Sure. So as part of these 356 incidents, 305 of them are acts of harassment. So this could include something like protesting outside of a drag show, sending in a bomb threat, or calling in a shooting threat against a gender-affirming healthcare provider. It could include other acts of harassment and verbal threats as well. And those are kind of the more common of the incidents that we've been seeing, but we've also been seeing more severe cases of vandalism and assault in the cases of a church that was set to hold a drag show, which was firebombed in Ohio, or even most tragically, the case of Club Q in Colorado Springs back in November, where a shooter tragically killed 5 patrons of the LGBTQ+ nightclub.
And Sarah, you touched on the kinds of incidents, harassment, vandalism, and assault. Where are these happening the most, and who is most commonly being targeted?
Sure. So unfortunately, we have seen these incidents happen nationwide. We tracked cases in 46 U.S. states in the District of Columbia, with the most incidents occurring in California, New York, Texas, and Florida.
So we know that this year, the American Civil Liberties Union and HRC say a record number of anti-LGBTQ+ bills were introduced this year across the country. I believe HRC put that number at more than 500. What's the effect of that on the queer community as a whole? And do you fear things could get worse before things get better?
Absolutely. I think as we see the rise in these hundreds of anti-LGBTQ plus proposals and bills and laws, the effect is unfortunately a mainstreaming of this type of hate and extremism that has previously existed on the fringes of society.
Sarah, what needs to happen to protect these communities? Is there something that we can all be doing?
Absolutely. We offer a whole comprehensive set of policy recommendations as part of our report, but there are actions that folks at the individual level can take and at the organizational level. So from the individual level, we are encouraging that folks report instances of anti-LGBTQ plus hate crimes to law enforcement if it rises to that level, or they can also report on our website at ADL. We also have a set of policy recommendations for social media platforms to protect LGBTQ plus users. We're also supporting a number of different pieces of legislation like the Equality Act. And overall, we're urging that folks encourage Congress to expand funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which provides security funding for nonprofits like LGBTQ plus community centers so they can protect themselves from these types of hate.
All right. Sarah Moore, thank you so much for joining us this morning and everything you do. We really appreciate it. For more reporting on the LGBTQ plus issues, my special Pride 2023 Out Front is available on Peacock, NBCNews.com, and YouTube, and will stream here on NBC News Now over the weekend as well.
International headlines now. Russian forces have detained 5 people for trying to buy radioactive material for Ukraine.
NBC's Josh Letterman joins us from London with that and other world headlines. Josh, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. The FSB spy service in Russia says that it detained those 5 people as they were trying to buy a kilogram of that radioactive material for $3.5 million. The FSB says those buyers were directed by a Ukrainian citizen to smuggle the material out of Russia to then try to stage a radioactive incident, which they would blame falsely on Moscow. Now, NBC News cannot independently verify that allegation, and so far, Ukraine isn't commenting. Now let's go to China, where temperatures in Beijing just set a new record, hitting 106 degrees Fahrenheit for the first time ever in June. Beijing's weather agency has put out a red alert, which is the highest level there, urging people to avoid outdoors working and for children and the elderly to take extra precautions. Extreme heat in China has arrived even earlier this year than it did last year. And finally, to the Netherlands, where archaeologists have found a 4,000-year-old sanctuary that shares some similarities with Stonehenge right here in the UK. This one is the size of at least 3 soccer fields, and it's made up of ditches and burial mounds that researchers believe were built to align with the sun on the solstices like a calendar. They also found animal skeletons, human skulls, and even a bronze spearhead at that site. Pretty cool stuff. Yeah. Back to you guys.
Just had a solstice just a couple days ago. All right, Josh, thank you so much. We're back with a look at the abortion rights debate in America 1 year after the Supreme Court overturned the landmark Roe versus Wade.
A new poll by NBC News has found that more than 60% of voters disapprove of the court's decision to reverse the ruling. NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray joins us now for more on this. So, Mark, walk us through this headline poll. What are we learning when it comes to specific groups and demographics?
Yeah, overall, 61% of voters say that they disapprove of the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe versus Wade versus 36% who approve. And these numbers are really consistent with our past polling. Back in August, it was 58% disapprove. And then in September of 2022, it was at 61%. So remarkable consistency there. And then when you look at actually individual groups, our poll shows that nearly 8 in 10 women ages 18 to 49 say that they disapprove of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Among suburban women, it's 66%. Among independent voters, it's 60%. And even a third of Republicans say that they disapprove of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe.
So just in the past year, we've already seen several states pass restrictions on abortion. So NBC News asked people about the ease of abortion access where they live. What did the survey show there?
Yeah, Joe, by a more than 2-to-1 margin, you end up having more voters say that that abortion has been made too difficult rather than too easy. versus just 13% who believe the nation has struck the right balance. And then when we asked people overall in their own states, we had a plurality of 43% who ended up saying that that their state has struck the right balance. But there was a really interesting geographical divide there where majorities in the Northeast and the West say that their states have struck the right balance, but that was a much smaller share in the South and the Midwest.
So, Mark, what do these results tell us about the importance of abortion rights as an issue for voters? And do you think it'll be a dominant factor in next year's election?
Yeah, when it comes to politics, our poll finds a really big intensity gap on this issue. 87% of Democratic voters say that they strongly disapprove of the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe. But among Republicans, 52% they say they strongly approve. That's a 35-point gap on intensity that I think we saw play out in the 2022 midterms, so we might be able to see play out in the 2024 election a year from now.
Okay, Mark, thank you so much.
Now, as we just discussed, the consequences of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade are changing the political landscape in America, but they're also having a big impact on some new doctors, pushing them to rethink where they want to do their residencies. That's the stage when a med school graduate starts working. Now, that's because abortion restrictions could have a big impact on how they're trained and how they care for patients. NBC News medical fellow Dr. Akshay Syal takes a closer look.
Morgan Levy has dreamed of becoming a gynecologist since the 7th grade.
I have grown up with super strong female role models in my life, and seeing them getting really good health care has been very influential to me.
Now, a 4th-year medical student, she's one of thousands hoping to make their dreams come true by applying to residency programs this fall. Since the Dobbs decision, students wanting to specialize in OBGYN, like Levy, are now having to consider how abortion laws will affect what they're being taught.
Having the fact that your training could be impacted specifically by the state you choose to train in, on top of the many factors that you already have, is a huge consideration.
A recent analysis shows that this year alone, there was a 10% drop in applications to OBGYN residency programs in states with abortion bans, compared to just a 5% drop in states where abortion is still legal. Sydney D. Gregory is an incoming resident at the University of Maryland, a state where abortion is protected.
If I stayed in a abortion-restricted state, that comes at the cost of potentially not getting the most in-depth training or having a lot of obstacles.
Over a third of OBGYN residency programs are in states where abortion access is banned or threatened. That's why some programs in these states are even using fruits as models for doctors to practice surgical abortions on. For D. Gregory, getting this in-depth training was a determining factor.
We know very well that in order to provide life-saving care, you need to be able to practice in non-emergency cases in order to do well in an emergency case.
These restrictions could impact all facets of medical care, not just those seeking abortions. A recent survey found that over half of medical students applying to any specialty were unlikely to apply to restrictive states. This could one day lead to devastating effects for patients, says Dr. Beverly Gray, program director for OBGYN at Duke Medical School.
If you are missing out on talented physicians moving to your state, you're potentially missing out on talented physicians that will live there lifelong and serve the people of that state. And so there are many potential domino effects of this.
Evidence shows there's a link between more restrictive abortion policies and higher rates of maternal and infant mortality, which could also worsen health disparities in abortion access.
I'm very worried about the future impacts on future patients.
But for Levy, the abortion landscape only fueling her lifelong dream.
It made me feel even more strongly that we need advocacy and good evidence-based medical care for all of our patients.
Thanks to Dr. Syal for that report. He says what remains to be seen is how this could affect all medical care in states with abortion restrictions, because doctors in other fields may also opt not to work in these places.
We're back with some reassuring news about school lunches and the effect they're having on kids' health.
A new study shows that students are no longer more likely to become obese if they eat lunches prepared by their schools. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Uche Blackstock joins us now. So, Dr. Blackstock, this dates back all the way to 2010 when there was a major overhaul in the federal nutrition standards for all school lunches. First of all, walk us through what were the changes that were made.
So, good morning, Joe. Thanks for having me. So the changes that were made were a focus on lean protein, a focus on whole grains, vegetables, and fruits, because before that, school lunches, unfortunately, were full of processed foods, high-calorie foods. They also put a cap on the number of calories in that lunch meal as well.
Doctor, what were some of the major takeaways from this new study? How does it appear that these standards are actually helping kids maintain those healthier lifestyles?
Yeah, so they found essentially, like, by changing the composition of lunch, that the school lunch was no longer associated with increasing obesity rates, and they found this regardless of socioeconomic status of the student. And what's so powerful is that just by changing this one meal, 1 out of 3 meals, they saw these changes in obesity rates, whereas before that, school lunch was associated with higher obesity rates.
Dr. Blackstock, if we don't eat school lunches or if we don't have kids in school, what are some of the takeaways the rest of us can take from this study? What should we be thinking about when we're getting lunch at work, and what should we be avoiding?
Yeah, it's really quite simple. You want to stay away from those processed foods. You want to eat whole foods. The proteins are, lean proteins, so chicken, also beans. If you are, if you don't eat meat, you want to stick with vegetables and fruit and those whole grains. So you want to make sure that you're having a complete meal with all of those key ingredients. I know it's hard, and sometimes you can have a sweetie on the side, a sweet snack, but you really just want to make sure that you are following the nutritional guidelines and having all of those components of what's considered to be a healthy meal, especially for lunch.
Such an interesting change from back in the days when I had that rectangular pizza and nothing seemed terribly healthy. I mean, is this surprising, Dr. Blackstock, do you think, or is this kind of where we've been heading all this time?
No, it's not really surprising, but the issues that we've seen child obesity rates increase significantly over the last few years, and that's a problem because that's often correlated with higher rates of obesity as adults and more likely to develop heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes. So we want to make sure that, especially among children, that we are using, just sort of common sense techniques like, promoting healthy meals and healthy free meals at school. And we know that will have an effect on their future as well.
All right, Dr. Uche Blackstock, some good news here. Thank you so much for sharing it. We appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
Some financial headlines now. Starbucks workers are wearing their pride on their sleeves.
CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and other money news. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Valerie. Good morning to you. That's right. So a Starbucks union says some organized stores are going on strike starting today in Seattle. The move comes after the coffee giant and the union, which represents baristas, have clashed over claims Starbucks didn't allow employees to decorate stores for Pride Month. Starbucks Workers United says more than 150 stores have pledged to join the strikes, which will take place over the next week. The workers say they're also striking over claims Starbucks is dragging its feet on negotiating contracts with the union. Ford is preparing a new round of layoffs for salaried workers. The Wall Street Journal reports the cuts are expected to affect employees at the automaker's gas, electric vehicle, and software divisions. But the exact number isn't clear. And last year, Ford announced plans to cut up to $3 billion in costs at its gas-powered vehicle unit. And last summer said it would cut 3,000 salaried and contract jobs. Meanwhile, rivals GM and Stellantis have recently said they're offering employee buyouts. Lithuania is looking to be the home to Europe's largest tech hub. A major project spanning 180,000 square feet is being built in the capital of Vilnius. Now, the aim is to encourage tech workers to return to the office. Vilnius is home to a flourishing tech, including major billion-dollar startups such as cybersecurity firm Nordguys.
If you had a cool-looking office like that, you're probably going to want to go to it, right?
Right. Spend the night there, spend the whole week there.
We're moving in. We're moving in.
Silvana, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
It is now officially summer. We can say that. But that comes with a lot of additional expenses.
According to a recent survey by Bankrate, 63% of U.S. adults plan to travel this summer. And that means, of course, paying for flights, hotels, food, and much more. all of that can quickly lead to overspending. Tori Dunlap is a money expert and founder of her first 100K. She's here now with some tips on how you can have fun this summer without breaking your bank. Tori, good morning. Thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
So give us some tips. How can people stay on budget when you have all these summer activities coming up?
Yep, couple things. First, get a plan together and stick to it. It's very easy when you're like 3 margaritas deep on a beach somewhere to be like, all right, plans out the window, budget's out the window. Have a plan and stick to it. Second thing is we always say, like, you can afford almost anything. I have another personal finance expert friend who likes to say that, but you just can't afford everything. So determine, like, what do you want to get out of your experience traveling? For me, it's food. Like, I don't care. Like, I want to eat good food. That's where my money goes. And the other things I'm less excited about. And then finally, when you're thinking about traveling and especially managing a budget, it's all about thinking about, like, this might be the only vacation you get all summer or really all year. And so, like, how can you balance all of the rest of your spending with the spending on the vacation that you really want to do?
Let's look specifically at summer getaways. We know people want to get out even though inflation is making things more expensive.
Right.
So what are some tips to make these summer getaways a little more affordable?
It sounds kind of counterintuitive. I need you to actually work backwards, meaning start by finding the flight deal. Just don't care where you go. There's a bunch of incredible locations, especially like abroad. The amount of times I've been to Europe where it's just like, I just have to get to Europe and then I'll figure out where I want to go after that because I can take a Ryanair flight. That's, you know, $2. So I found so many cheap flights. I live in Seattle and I'm flying to London later this year for $500 round trip, and then I'll go wherever I want to go in Europe once I've gotten there. So determine your trip, even if it's domestic, based on the location first, and then work your way backward from planning.
Summer, of course, is wedding season. I know someone that has 7 weddings to go to this year, and she says she can't miss any of them. They're very close friends. If you're part of the wedding party, that makes it even more expensive. So how can you budget for something like that?
I would say for your friend, it sounds like she really does need to attend 7 weddings. The question I ask people is, it's like, if you feel like this is a kind of friendship that would fall apart if you don't attend their wedding, I'm not sure you should be friends. Like, it's just like a red flag. Like, actually ask yourself, like, is this a wedding that I want to attend and can afford to attend? And I think any good friend will understand if you can't. If you are attending, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're thinking about, like, what am I having to wear for all of this? Like, I was a bridesmaid, and the cost of that is crazy. Rent your dress if you can. Like, rent your materials. You can rent sometimes your jewelry, especially if you don't want to be pictured in the same dress for 7 weddings. Rent your clothes. Armoire is a great place to do that. And also think strategically, if you're flying somewhere for a wedding, it's going to cost you about $1,200, recent studies say. So make a vacation out of it. I literally have friends in Rome right now who have attended a wedding and have, you know, stretched it for the week so they can experience the rest of Italy too.
Do you think she can ask all 7 brides just to use the same bridesmaid dress?
Just pass it around.
Just for her convenience? That's probably not going to happen. You talk a lot about financial literacy, which is something that I think a lot of people just don't know about. Just yesterday, we're reporting on this new bank rate survey, which basically said a majority of Americans are not comfortable with their emergency savings. How do we change that? What are your best tips to get people to just start saving more?
Yeah, that's the #1 thing we're uncomfortable talking about. We'll talk about sex, death, politics, religion before we'll talk about money. And I wrote an entire book called Financial Feminist about getting comfortable with money and overcoming all of that. The first thing is to get really honest with yourself about what's going on in your financial picture. It's very easy to, what we call the ostrich effect, bury your head in the sand, act like your problems don't exist. And what happens is just your problems accumulate, right? So first of all, like, get honest with yourself without shame and judgment. And the second thing is just do one thing today that'll make your life better. It'll take you less than 5 minutes. Maybe that is opening up a high yield savings account so you can earn more interest. Maybe that is looking at your bank statements for the first time in a while. Maybe that's figuring out, what am I getting paid and is it commensurate with the market rate that I hopefully should. So just take one step. You're not going to save $1 million overnight, but you just need these quick wins. You need these dopamine hits in order to keep going.
And I think a message to everyone out there who's experiencing this is you're not alone.
No. Oh, it's, again, the #1 stress that people have in America, and it's the #1 thing that people are just really nervous about. And I always like to say that you should be in control of your money rather than your money controlling you, and money is a tool to build the life that you love.
All right, Tori, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back. This one is a tearjerker about a firefighter and his wife. They adopted a baby who came to them in the most unexpected way. The man, who wishes to stay anonymous, woke up to an alarm at 2 a.m. It came from a Safe Haven baby box. Now, this is a box that allows someone to safely and anonymously surrender a child. When the firefighter opened the box, he discovered the baby girl wrapped in a pink blanket. Now, when he dropped her off at the hospital, he also left a note saying that he and his wife had been trying to have a baby for 10 years and were registered to adopt. They were given the green light and officially adopted the baby they called Zoe in April. He says, "We locked eyes and that was it. I've loved her ever since that moment." And that one made me tear up the first
I know,
time
me
I read
too.
it
It's
this
so
morning.
sweet.
Such a sweet story. Congratulations to them and for sharing that story with all of us.
Yeah, what a gift to them. The first round of the NBA draft is officially in the books. The biggest headline was French phenom Victor Wembanyama, who, as expected, went first to the San Antonio Spurs.
For more on this, we are joined by Mike Vorkunov, national NBA reporter at The Athletic. Mike, good morning to you. So, I mean, this is believed to be one of the most stacked NBA drafts in recent history. We've all heard about Wemby, a generational talent, the comparisons to LeBron James. Help us understand what makes him so special, and in your mind, what do you think we can expect from him in the NBA?
Well, I'll start with the size. Obviously, everyone else does. He's 7'4". He might be 7'5". Who knows? He might not be done growing. He's only 19. Sky's the limit, literally. You know, you see him wherever he goes. Even last night in Brooklyn at the NBA draft, he's so tall it feels like you can see him anywhere inside Barclays Center. He really does tower over whoever he's next to. And, you know, that even in itself is an outlier for the NBA, right? A league full of very tall people. And at someone that size, he has the skills and he plays in a way of someone who's a foot shorter than him. It's really weird. It's this thing that we've rarely ever seen in NBA history. And so it's the size, it's the skill, it's the personality, it's the preparation to get to this point in his life, in his career, that makes him such an intriguing prospect and why people are so excited about him. You mentioned LeBron James. He's the most anticipated player to come into the NBA since LeBron James did, 20 years ago.
Wemby aside, Mike, let's talk about the rest of the draft. What were your big takeaways from last night?
We heard so much about how there might be a trade or there might be this or that, but it was actually pretty static. There were no trades. Teams were, especially at the top of the draft, willing and wanted to stay where they were to take the players available. You had Brandon Miller, who's a high-scoring 6'9" wing from Alabama. He went number 2 to Charlotte. And Scoot Henderson, who for a long time had been seen as the second-best prospect in the draft, himself a potential all-star to come. He went number 3 to Portland, and that sets up an interesting situation of the future versus the present in Portland there and what happens with Damian Lillard. But I think there's some expectation that there might be more trades and more traffic going on last night, but it was actually pretty static and still pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it happens every year that players rise or fall in the draft. Any surprises this year?
There were, actually, involving Victor Wembanyama's teammate in France, Bilal Coulibaly, who played with him for Metropolitans '92, landed at number 7 in the draft to the Washington Wizards. And this is someone who might not have been expected to be a lottery pick even a month or two ago, and he slides up into the draft that high. Jet Howard, who's the son of Juwan Howard, the former NBA player and now the Michigan coach, he landed at number 11. A lot of people thought that was maybe a little bit too high for him getting into the lottery. So those are the two big surprises at the top of the draft, and Cam Whitmore slid all the way to number 20 forward from Villanova, and he was expected to be potentially someone who goes as high as number 5.
Wow. All right. Mike Vorkunov, thanks so much for breaking it down. We appreciate it. Speaking of the NBA draft, we have an update to a story we told you about yesterday. That's when we talked with Jordan Haber. The aspiring lawyer grabbed headlines when he found a little loophole in the NBA's collective bargaining agreement, which allowed him to actually enter the NBA draft. Well, last night, he made his way to the Barclays Center in Brooklyn for basketball's big night.
With the first pick in the 2023 NBA draft, the San Antonio Spurs select Victor Wembanyama.
Number 2, maybe. I think I'm in for a long night. Maybe in the 50th pick or something. I don't know.
Yeah, Jordan had those high hopes he might go at number 1 there. We're sorry to report Jordan was not selected, but the good news is that he has the story of a lifetime. He's documenting it all. And oh yeah, he's going to have a law degree to fall back on in the future. It was fun chatting with him yesterday. And
he had a dream.
He's exactly the dream. New dreams will come.
New dreams.
He's young.
We end the hour with a blast from the past. Remember Friday nights at your local video store? Well, they are back.
Yeah, a movie institution in Los Angeles is bringing back the glory days of VHS. NBC News Now anchor Gotti Schwartz gives us a first-hand look.
Remember what it was like getting ready for a Friday night, heading to your local video store to peruse the aisles?
Now this is a video store.
Well, that experience is nearly forgotten these days. But in the shell of a 94-year-old movie theater in Northeast LA's Eagle Rock neighborhood, a merry band of hopeless optimists are mounting an unlikely comeback.
It was the thing to do. Friday nights were like a party in our store.
Kathy Tauber and Patty Polinger opened Vidiot's in 1985, and for more than 30 years, the independent video shop was an LA institution. Until 2017, when the forces reshaping the media landscape caught up.
We were trying to reinvent ourselves, trying to stay vital, and it was like, in the end, we just couldn't pull any more rabbits out of the hat.
Like tens of thousands of communities across the country, what was once a fixture faded. Until now.
There's nothing like walking down here. Oh, it's incredible. I mean, this is like being 15.
With the help of a star-studded cast of supporters like the morning show's Mark Duplass, Vidiot's is celebrating the unimaginable. The grand opening of a new video store with an astonishing 60,000 titles for rent, a 270-seat movie theater, and a hunger for the shared experiences of the past.
You can come to a place like this and say, God, you know, I really love what Spike Lee was doing and what Hal Hartley was doing. But, like, I also kind of like stuff that's, like, a little more, like, visually interesting, you know? It's like, come with me, my child, you know? And they hook you up. Do you think that's something an algorithm can do? I don't know, but my honest answer to that is I don't want it. I want to be with a person. I want to be able to look them in the eye. I want to have that experience.
And for kids who have grown up without all this,
that's where I think the mind-blowing is going to happen. They have no understanding of anything. Searching for films only happens here.
I have a feeling young kids are going to be like, "This is a bookstore? Is this a bookstore? Wow. Why do you open it?
Yeah.
What is this thing inside
do
it?
I eat it? Is that what I do?
And so far, demand has been a bit like 1985, with more than 1,000 DVDs rented in just the first few days.
This is one of these things where the community just screamed, we want this thing and we need this thing. And that's the only reason it exists.
Did you ever imagine that you would be the last bastion standing in this entire landscape?
Never. We thought it was like a 5-year thing.
Call it a Hollywood comeback, hoping to recapture that Friday night magic. Gotti Schwartz, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Just remember, if you rent it, you do have to return it. And if it's VHS, be kind. Rewind.
Life lessons.
Exactly. Very important. Yeah, they'll prepare you for life. All right. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now. Good Friday morning to you. I'm Valerie Castro in for Savannah Sellers.
Good to have you with us on this Friday. I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, a tragic conclusion. Massive search effort for that missing submersible on the hunt for the wreck of the Titanic has come to an end. All 5 people on board are presumed dead, killed in what the Coast Guard is calling a catastrophic implosion. The tragedy comes as another chilling revelation comes to light. The 19-year-old student on board with his father reportedly confided that he was, quote, terrified about the journey. We've got much more on the Titan's untimely fate as questions mount over its final expedition. Widespread wild weather. This morning, we're getting a closer look at the devastation in a small Texas town after a suspected powerful tornado. At least 4 people were killed, more than a dozen others injured, and nearly every home and building damaged or destroyed. And And more devastation in Colorado with yet another round of destructive hail and rain and a suspected tornado in Denver. We're covering it all, plus your weekend forecast. Final touches, that critical stretch of I-95 in Philadelphia, which collapsed less than 2 weeks ago, will reopen to traffic. So how did the repair time go from months to just weeks? We've got to look at the secret ingredient that helped put this repair job in the fast lane. And we can't leave you without our can't miss list. It's all the must-see content for your weekend that includes the highly, highly anticipated return of the one and only Carrie Bradshaw. Sex and the City fans excited to see that return back for season 2 of And Just Like That.
I caught some of that last night, actually.
You've already watched it? Good? Were you happy with it?
We'll see how it goes.
Okay, all right. More reviews to come. We're going to start this morning with new developments in the investigation into the loss of the Titan Sub in the North Atlantic.
Yesterday morning, a removed vehicle found what officials describe as a debris field roughly 1,600 feet away from the bow of the Titanic.
Essentially, we found 5 different major pieces of debris that told us that it was the remains of the Titan.
After locating a debris field at the bottom of the ocean, the Coast Guard says it's clear the vessel experienced a catastrophic implosion, killing all 5 people on board. This morning, the focus is turning to how the accident happened and the safety of the submersible. In just a moment, we're going to hear from a salvage expert on what the recovery and investigation could look like. But we start with NBC News correspondent Tom Costello. He has the latest from Boston.
Good morning. Coast Guard Command is now withdrawing many of the resources it has in the search zone so they can reset for the next potential emergency call. They will leave an ROV scanning the bottom of the ocean, looking for that debris field, surveying and documenting the debris field. In the meantime, we now know that what happened on Sunday, only an hour and 45 minutes into the dive. That means it was long before the search and rescue effort was ever launched. And it means it was probably very quick. In the vast expanse of the North Atlantic, a tragic conclusion to the search that's captivated the world's attention. The Coast Guard reporting the submersible that disappeared during a dive to the Titanic on Sunday experienced a catastrophic implosion, killing all 5 people on board.
It is a difficult day for all of us, and it's especially difficult for the families.
The Navy tells NBC News that on Sunday it detected an audio anomaly that, while not definitive, appeared consistent with an implosion or an explosion about the time the sub lost communication during the dive. On Thursday, a Canadian team using a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV, discovered 2 debris fields roughly 1,600 feet from the site of the Titanic.
Essentially, we found 5 different major pieces of debris that told us that it was the remains of the Titan.
The doomed mini-sub rests at a depth of more than 2.5 miles, where the pressure is hundreds of times greater than it is on the surface.
It's one Empire State Building made of lead sitting on top of you at that level.
Overnight on CNN, Titanic director James Cameron, himself a deep-sea diving record breaker, criticized the OceanGate sub's carbon fiber composite design.
The collective we didn't remember the lesson of Titanic. These guys at OceanGate didn't, because the arrogance and the hubris that sent that ship to its doom is exactly the same thing that sent those people in that sub to their fate.
One of the men on board, Stockton Rush, the founder of OceanGate, which operated the sub, addressed those concerns last year.
I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me. The carbon fiber and titanium, there's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did.
He was trying to push the technology forward to make it larger submarines to go deeper, so he was taking risks.
Among those lost, famed billionaire and explorer Hamish Harding, French mariner Paul-Henri Nogelet, and Shahzada Dawood with his son Suleiman. Shahzada's sister says her nephew was terrified but went on the journey to bond with his father, adding, while she's devastated by the loss, she's relieved to know they didn't suffer.
To know that my Sully didn't feel a moment's pain, that his brain didn't even realize, that's relief.
The Navy says that it did hear that anomaly on Sunday, and it forwarded that information to Incident Command here in Boston. But Incident Command felt they still needed to launch the search and rescue effort in case somebody might have survived. And those noises that they were hearing on Wednesday, on Thursday, they thought maybe they heard tapping. They now say that that had nothing to do likely with the mini sub. It was more likely just the regular sound, and there's a lot of it in the ocean at any one time. Back to you.
All right, such a tragic situation. Tom, thanks so much.
We want to bring in Bobby Scully for more on this. She is a retired Navy captain, was also the diving and salvage officer for the 1996 TWA Flight 800 recovery operation. Bobby, thanks for joining us. We appreciate having your expertise on this. So we heard from officials the submersible likely imploded at some point during its descent into the water earlier this week. Do we have an idea what are the possibilities of what could lead to an implosion like that?
Well, an implosion happens when you have great pressure on a vessel, and there's just a tiny defect in that vessel that would allow for those great pressures to collapse that vessel. And it appears that that's probably what happened in this case, caused by something that would make that vessel have a defect from possibly all the usages within that going up and down over the course of many voyages. It's hard to speculate at this point, but hopefully an investigation will give us answers to what caused those defects in the vessel.
You know, now comes the recovery operation. Walk us through exactly what that might look like. And then when we talk about the investigation, what kind of information can be learned from the debris as they try and learn exactly what happened here?
Well, now that we're out of the search phase, we go into the recovery phase. And just like any other investigation, the recovery team is going to want to map out the debris field, just like you would do in any other investigation. So they'll do a thorough mapping with the cameras that they have on the ROVs, and they'll provide that information to the investigators. And once they've mapped all that out, then they'll try to recover as much of the debris that they possibly can so that they can send that up to the experts, kind of like you would in an investigation when you turn over the evidence to a forensics team. They'll provide all the pieces that they can to the experts. And then those experts will go through and evaluate the pieces to find anything that they can see that would be out of the ordinary.
We've heard so much criticism this week, so many warnings about this. Do you see this changing the future use of submersibles for this kind of in-person exploration? Are these types of excursions, you think, just too dangerous for people to go on?
Well, you know, submersibles are very valuable in scientific research to the depths of the ocean, which need to continue because we can learn so much from the depths of the oceans. But I think this is going to open a conversation that we need to have about how we regulate these sorts of submersibles for exploration. And that's maybe overdue. And unfortunately, this is an incident that's going to start those conversations.
All right. Bobby Scully, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.
Now to the latest on the severe weather across the country. This morning, cleanup is underway after a deadly tornado slammed a small Texas town. You can see trees splintered and cars and homes crushed. For more, we're joined by NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer in hard-hit Matador, Texas. Miguel, good morning.
Valerie, good morning. The damage here in Matador is extensive. You can see this home here was completely obliterated by what was likely an EF3 tornado. This scene is really repeated block after block. So many homes, businesses, and buildings have literally been wiped off the map. And this isn't the only extensive damage that we're seeing. Other states like Colorado are also dealing with severe weather.
Overnight, a second round of rain and hail dumping on Denver.
Oh my God, the fence!
As a possible supercell tornado uproots trees and rips off roofs. Less than 24 hours earlier, paramedics treated as many as 90 people pelted by golf ball-sized hail at an outdoor concert.
It's hailing so hard, and a bunch of girls are stuck there in a porta potty.
The misery in Colorado came amid mayhem in Texas. This powerful summer twister killing 4 people and injuring more than a dozen others. The wrecked and unrecognizable remains, all that's left of the small town of Matador. The area, about 70 miles outside of Lubbock, is now under a disaster declaration. Many homes, businesses, and buildings reduced to devastating debris fields.
And we barely got the door shut and got down to the stairs, and it had hit our house that fast.
The Dempsey family took cover in their basement as the furious funnel decimated their home in minutes.
We could hear the porch being ripped off the side of the house. It sounded honestly like a train was coming into our house.
You think you're lucky you survived?
Oh yeah, we're absolutely blessed.
Others also left with little to rebuild.
This is our family home. It's just like there's nothing left.
It all caps off a week of dangerous weather across the country, with over 500 reports of severe weather since Sunday, including a damaging tornado in Moss Point, Mississippi. But after the storm, the community coming together, a high school football squad teaming up to clear debris, shining a ray of hope amid the ruin.
Back here in Texas, it's going to take months to clean up and years to rebuild, and the severe weather is far from over. We expect extraordinary heat here over the next couple of days, all the way through the rest of this month. We're expecting temperatures in the triple digits. Tens of millions will be under excessive heat warnings today. Valerie?
All right, we appreciate your reporting there on the ground, Miguel. Thank you so much.
Time now for your morning news now weather, and there is no relief from the heat in Texas.
Meteorologist Angie Lassman has that for us this morning. Good morning, Angie.
Good morning, guys. You heard Miguel say it. We've got excessive heat that we're expecting across much of Texas, extending into New Mexico, parts of Oklahoma as well. We've recently seen a heat watch issued for Wichita Falls, but we've got heat warnings for Del Rio, extending to Corpus Christi, and for good reason. That oppressive heat continues. The Texas sizzle is going to continue through the weekend as well. But here's a look at those afternoon temperatures across the state. San Antonio heads to 100 degrees. We'll feel like 110 at the warmest part of the day. Corpus Christi, you're going to feel like 117 into this afternoon. So another day where you got to take it slow. Extra water, AC if you have the ability to get to the AC, and otherwise finding your cool spot whatever way you can. These are the temperatures rolling through the weekend. I know folks probably want to have some outdoor plans for the weekend, but unfortunately we stay about 109 for both Saturday and Sunday, even warmer in Laredo on Monday with a high of 112. So not really any relief coming for this area. We'll continue to see those warmer than normal and really oppressive conditions continuing into early next week. Meanwhile, we have another day where we have the potential for some strong storms, and it does include parts of Texas once again. We have those threats, including the hail, specifically tennis ball size hail possible. We'll also have those strong winds up to 75 miles per hour, and can't rule out some tornadoes. Meanwhile, flood watches are in effect through parts of the southeast. That's where we've seen heavy rain working through this morning. Some very active thunderstorms with a whole lot of lightning. We're going to continue to see more rain working through that area from basically the southeast up to the mid-Atlantic and northeast through the next couple of days. So umbrellas handy. And of course, we've got a lot going on in the tropics. Tropical Storm Cindy, this is our 4th named storm of the season. It's moving right now northwest at 15 miles per hour with 45 mile per hour winds. It is expected to strengthen, but the good news is this is going to stay out into the Atlantic. We're looking at it to move just north of the Caribbean islands, so we're not looking at impacts for them, and specifically not for the United States either, but we are continuing to keep an eye on that. And if you're keeping track, Tropical Storm Brett is still moving through parts of the Caribbean, bringing heavy rain to parts of the Lesser Antilles. The Leeward Islands, the Windward Islands have dealt with the wind, the rain over the past 24 hours. But, it usually takes until August for us to see the 4th named storm system of the year, guys, but we're running 6 weeks ahead of schedule. So what are you going to do? Warm water.
All right. Might be a long summer. All right.
Indeed.
Thanks, Angie. Appreciate it. It was a surprise appearance at the White House last night by President Biden's son. Hunter Biden attended the state dinner just days after striking that plea deal to settle federal tax charges. NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins us now with more on this. So, Kelly, tell us, how much of a surprise was this public appearance? What's some of the reaction we're hearing?
Good morning, Joe. Well, the White House didn't make it public ahead of time until they put out the guest list that Hunter Biden was coming, but he attends a lot of events here at the White House. And we could see the president's son was on full display. He is the first child of a sitting president to be criminally charged. He was invited to be among the high-profile guests at this White House state dinner, honoring the Prime Minister of India. And he was mixing and he was mingling in black tie. It was a glamorous affair. Hunter Biden was among a number of Biden family members who were in attendance for this very important event for the White House. The White House also invited the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and the Republican House Speaker was there as well, Kevin McCarthy, who says that he believes the House GOP should keep investigating the president's son and his business dealings. And of course, this was Hunter Biden's first public appearance after the announcement on Tuesday of this week that he was entering into a plea bargain agreement with a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Delaware. And that deal ends a 5-year investigation into the Hunter Biden finances, and it resolves a gun possession charge during a time when Hunter Biden says he was addicted to drugs. Now, in dealing with this case, he is set to go to court next month, and he's going to be charged on 2 misdemeanor counts that are related to his taxes. Joe?
Of course, this isn't going to go away, at least in the public eye. On top of all this, Kelly, we understand there's some new whistleblower testimony following the plea deal. What can you tell us about that?
The criminal case appears to be resolved with this plea deal, but there's a political case that will still be made. And a GOP House-led committee has released testimony from 2 IRS agents who are whistleblowers. And they say that the DOJ and other government officials improperly interfered in their investigation of Hunter Biden, giving him what they call preferential treatment. One of those agents also provided what he says was a WhatsApp message, a text-like message from Hunter Biden to a Chinese business associate in 2017, in which in that message, he says he is sitting with his father, waiting for an answer to a proposal, and that he would regret not following direction, meaning the Chinese businessman. NBC has not confirmed the authenticity of the message. Now, we should be clear, the White House says there was no political interference in the case involving Hunter Biden, and his own attorneys are not commenting. Joe?
All right, Kelly, thank you so much. The repair job on that collapsed portion of I-95 in Philadelphia is bringing a new definition to high-speed lane.
In fact, that part of the highway you see here will reopen later today, well ahead of schedule. You can expect this to look a lot busier just a few hours from now.
NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda joins us now from Philly with more on just how those repairs happen so fast. Emily, good morning.
Good morning to you both. Well, one of the reasons for that rapid rebuild is right here. Nearly 2,000 tons of recycled glass aggregate that is deceivingly lightweight. It's the temporary solution to prop up the 6 newly paved lanes behind me. They're reconnecting the severed section of a critical thoroughfare that tens of thousands of Americans rely on every day.
Less than 2 weeks after a tanker truck crashed and burst into flames, collapsing this critical section of I-95 in Philadelphia, a complete transformation. This morning, crews are putting the final touches on a temporary roadway, which is expected to reopen today, well ahead of the anticipated months-long timeline.
And we have completed each phase of this project safely and way ahead of schedule.
Beneath the 3 lanes each way is a bed of recycled glass aggregate.
8 million bottles have been turned into this aggregate that we're using in our project.
The environmentally friendly material has been used in projects in 20 states, according to Pennsylvania's Secretary of Transportation.
Is there a weight limit for this kind of glass aggregate? Is this safe?
Totally safe. There's no limit with respect to vehicles that will cross that, just as they would any other bridge that we have anywhere in Pennsylvania.
NASCAR also lending a hand, sending one of its jet dryer cars to help complete the paving process. After traffic returns to the newly paved lanes, crews will begin constructing a portion of the permanent bridge around it, then divert traffic to those lanes, and finally remove the filler to build the main portion of the overpass. The severed roadway that 160,000 vehicles rely on daily, snarling traffic in the area and creating fears of potential supply chain disruptions. And while some drivers are hesitant to use the new overpass given the speed of the rebuild,
I won't get on there at first, I don't think. I don't know. I don't trust it yet.
Many businesses and commuters are welcoming any relief on the road.
I'm glad, like seriously glad that they actually about to get done fixing it.
And this stretch of I-95 will reopen today at noon, but keep in mind there will be fewer lanes, and those lanes will be more narrow, which means a dip in speed limit and potentially some lingering traffic. Still, Joe, you can imagine a vast improvement compared to the past 2 weeks.
No kidding. All right, Emily Ikeda, thank you so much. We're back with an update on the Rust movie set shooting. Prosecutors are accusing armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed of tampering with evidence. And now she's facing an additional charge. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin has more.
Hey there, this is the latest twist in the legal saga for the film's Armor. With her attorneys fighting to have the case thrown out, prosecutors have come back with an additional charge.
So here's the box that I got them out of.
Okay.
As Armor Hannah Gutierrez-Reed showed investigators around the set in the hours after the deadly shooting.
I just need you to relax. Just relax, okay?
Prosecutors now charged that sometime the same day, Gutierrez-Reed tampered with evidence, saying she transferred narcotics to another person with the intent to prevent the apprehension, prosecution, or conviction of herself. This is in addition to the charge of involuntary manslaughter Gutierrez-Reed already faces, and comes on the heels of a court filing 2 weeks ago, in which prosecutors say witnesses will testify Gutierrez-Reed was drinking heavily and smoking marijuana in the evenings during filming, adding it is likely she was hungover when she inserted a live bullet into a gun that she knew an actor would later use. Gutierrez-Reed's attorneys responded, saying the accusation she was likely hungover is recklessly false and is not supported by admissible evidence. Now hitting back with a new statement, invoking Shakespeare's Hamlet, saying something is rotten in Denmark. It is shocking that after 20 months of investigation, the prosecution now throws in a completely new charge with no prior notice or any witness statements, lab reports, or evidence to support it. In April, prosecutors dropped involuntary manslaughter charges against actor Alec Baldwin, saying at the time new facts had come to light.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
But the gun went off, killing cinematographer Helena Hutchins. Her husband, Matt Hutchins, telling Hoda there were numerous safety issues on the set.
Her death was preventable and she deserved to live. I think we have to get to the ultimate responsibility of those parties who caused her death.
In a separate court filing, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's attorney said he was mistakenly copied on an email from Robert Schilling, the lead investigator in the district attorney's case, where Schilling called the conduct of the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office during and after their initial investigation reprehensible and unprofessional. The Armor's attorney called the exchange beyond troubling and said it was highly exculpatory for Gutierrez-Reed. NBC News has reached out to both the Sheriff's Office and Schilling, but have not heard back. Back to you.
All right, Aaron McLaughlin, thank you.
Turning now to the war in Ukraine, and Kyiv says its forces have managed to stop Russian attacks in the east of the country. It comes as Ukraine continues its counteroffensive operations. NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us from Kyiv with an exclusive look at Ukraine's aerial war. Raf?
Valerie, we wanted to get a sense of the war in the skies, and so we spent some time with Ukrainian helicopter pilots who are flying combat missions in support of the counteroffensive. We saw up close the daring of these pilots who are risking their lives to protect the ground troops, but we also saw how badly outnumbered they are compared to Putin's air force.
2 weeks into their long-awaited counteroffensive, Ukraine's forces are facing fierce Russian resistance and making slow progress on the ground. Part of the problem? They're badly outgunned in the air. Russia's fighter aircraft are far more advanced, and there are far more of them. A comparison shows Ukraine outnumbered 15-1 on both jets and attack helicopters. We traveled to a clearing in the woods in the east that's doubling as a Ukrainian helicopter base.
This unit has a dangerous mission. They fly out to attack Russian forces, support Ukrainian ground troops taking part in the counteroffensive, and then get back here quickly before enemy fighter jets can catch them.
Captain Alexander is one of the few Ukrainian pilots still in the skies, flying an aging Soviet-era helicopter gunship into combat above his homeland.
How does it feel to be fighting a full-scale war in your own country?
This is my duty, this is my task, as well as the task of all soldiers, the task of all men, he says. They fly just over the tree line, sometimes as low as 15 feet off the ground, hunting for enemy tanks and infantry. And with ammunition desperately short, they try to make sure every bullet counts.
Can Ukraine compete with Russia in the air?
I think yes, even though we really don't have enough modern equipment for this, he says. Modern planes, modern helicopters, but with what we have, we're very successful in completing the task. British military intelligence says Russia is reinforcing its attack helicopter fleet at this airfield near the front, which makes Ukraine's pleas for American-made F-16 fighter jets all the more urgent. but it may be months before Western aircraft arrive. So until then, Alexander and fellow pilots from the 18th Brigade will make do with what they have, staying in the air and staying in the fight.
So, Valerie, some pretty incredible flying there from Alexander and his fellow pilots. Meanwhile, in Russia, the head of the Wagner mercenary group is stepping up attacks on the Russian military leadership. He says the generals are lying to both the Russian people and to Vladimir Putin about the real causes of this war. He says Ukraine never had any intention of attacking Russia. And so, Valerie, it's pretty extraordinary. He feels emboldened to make those kind of accusations.
Important reporting there, Raph. Thanks so much.
More international headlines now. Dozens of migrants are dead after a boat sank near the Canary Islands.
NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now from London with more. Good morning, Josh.
Hey, good morning. Two charities working in the area say that about 60 people were on board that ship off the coast of the Canary Islands. And Spanish authorities so far have only rescued about 24 people and found 2 bodies, which means the rest of those individuals may have drowned. But this is just the latest tragic incidents from migrants at sea after hundreds of people died last week when that fishing ship packed with migrants sank off the coast of Greece. Now to India, where severe flooding and heavy rains are posing major problems for nearly 500,000 people. Roads have become rivers and entire villages are currently underwater in the state of Assam. Authorities say at least 1 person has died and about 14,000 have been evacuated to relief camps as officials try to keep that death toll from climbing any higher. And finally to France, where those fictional flying cars popularized in the Jetsons may not be fictional for that much longer. The Paris region is preparing to roll out flying taxis ahead of the 2024 Olympics next year. They are both pilotless and all electric, meaning no carbon dioxide pollution. And if European regulators give the green light, they could be the world's first flying taxis. I think I would have more of a concern about the pilotless part, but I don't know.
And then the other taxi, Josh, you test it out, tell us how it goes, and then we'll give it a shot after that.
I'll report back to you.
All right, thanks.
Welcome back. A major win for abortion rights advocates in Wyoming. A judge just blocked a statewide medication abortion ban last night. The law was the first of its kind to pass in the U.S., and it was supposed to take effect July 1st. But now this new ruling means abortion pills will remain legal in the state while a lawsuit plays out. One of the plaintiffs in that suit is a brand new abortion clinic in Casper, Wyoming. But legal battles are far from the only challenge they faced. Here's NBC News correspondent Zincle Asamoah.
Someone broke into the clinic and proceeded to set some of the exam rooms on fire.
An arrest has not yet been made. In 2022, Wellspring Health Access in Casper, Wyoming was burned down. Today, after nearly $300,000 in repairs, doctors are finally starting to see patients, making this the only clinic in the state to offer both surgical and medical abortions, according to Wyoming providers.
I did not feel fearful coming to Casper or to the clinic until after the arson.
Julie Burkhardt is the founder and president of Wellspring in the nearly 60,000-person town of Casper. Though the state's abortion policies remain in legal limbo, the clinic remains open.
We have to fly physicians in from other states.
Burkhardt adds that patients now come from surrounding states as well, but it's not without resistance.
I never like to see babies killed intentionally.
Weekly protesters like John, who declined to provide his last name, opposing the clinic. Also outspoken is Casper's mayor, Bruce Nell.
They're welcome to do business here in our community, but as a human being, I have reservations.
When Wellspring reopened in April, Nell posted this image on the Facebook page of a local news outlet. Some interpreting it as support of the arson attack, which he denies.
In poor taste, I made a comment that I feel was misinterpreted.
What was that to you?
To me, it was not a picture of a burning building. It was of a person dancing in the fire. And my reference to that was those that choose to take the life of the unborn are certainly going to find the depths of hell.
Do you believe that was an appropriate thing to post as mayor?
As mayor or as Bruce Nell?
As Mayor Bruce Nell.
I don't know that it was inappropriate. I think it was in poor taste.
Prior to Wellspring Health Access, there were only two options for abortion in Wyoming, justthepill.org and Dr. Jovanina Anthony, who's been practicing in Jackson, Wyoming since 2005.
I just never thought that regular communication with attorneys would be part of my practice.
Anthony is one of the plaintiffs challenging Wyoming's total abortion ban. For now, with that ban contested in court, the Wellspring staff continue their work undeterred.
If we can only see patients for 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, at least we were able to see people and help those people in that moment in time.
Zincle Asamoah, NBC News.
Our thanks to Zincle for that report. The suspect in that arson attack, Lorna Roxanne Green, has pleaded not guilty to a felony arson charge. Investigators say the 22-year-old college student told them she opposes abortion and was experiencing nightmares and anxiety about the clinic when she decided to burn it. She faces up to 20 years in prison if convicted. And don't forget, you can check out our special, Abortion in America 1 Year Later. Meet the Press examined the impact of that landmark Supreme Court decision and what it means for the future of this country. It's streaming now.
Sales of e-cigarettes are on the rise since the start of the pandemic. That's according to new data from the CDC.
That research found that monthly sales of e-cigs rose nearly 50% from January 2020 to December 2022.
NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel joins us now with more on these numbers. Dr. Patel, good morning. So most of this spike in sales is attributed to disposable e-cigs. We know the FDA banned those fruit-flavored e-cigs 3 years ago, but that ban did not include disposable products. So did that ban curb vaping at all? And tell us, are those disposable e-cigs sort of a loophole here?
Yeah, Joe, let's start there. They are definitely a loophole, and Congress actually even closed that loophole last year. But there's still been workarounds that manufacturers have found by doing what's called lab-based nicotine, which wasn't included in closing the loophole. So to your point, there's been ways where manufacturers have figured out how to get the products out. And as a result, as the CDC has documented, we've seen an increase in sales. And I do think that the FDA is trying to play a bit of whack-a-mole to make sure that manufacturers and stores and retailers understand what they cannot sell, especially to youth and teens, which a lot of these disposable cigarettes are very appealing to, and we're seeing a remarkable rise. 20% of high school students reporting using some of these e-cigarettes at some point in the last several years.
Dr. Patel, you mentioned some of those e-cigs maybe geared towards younger users with the flavors, the fruity flavors. We did see a huge rise in sales of those flavors compared to the others in this period. What did that report tell us about the rate of teen vaping?
Yeah, so the teen vaping, not just high school students, but overall teen vaping, while there was a little bit of a decline that they saw early in the pandemic, probably, Valerie, because a lot of teens were in their homes and in their households and not necessarily with other peers who are using e-cigarettes. We saw any of those declines rebound and have an increase, especially as everybody's been back into more normal environments. What this tells us is that this is really a social network effect, Valerie. If you go to youth and teens, if you find that one or two in your network of friends are using e-cigarettes, you are 3 to 4 times more likely yourself to start using these cigarettes. So it's a remarkably disturbing trend in the increase of these e-cigarettes.
Dr. Patel, let's just talk big picture here. And I know the science on this is constantly evolving as we move along, but bring us up to date on how much riskier experts now think it is to smoke e-cigs versus just regular cigarettes.
Yeah, and one thing I want to make clear is that this is a really big a flashpoint attention, because e-cigarettes can help some people who smoke what I want to call the traditional cigarettes that you and I think of in the box that we put into the mouths of adults especially. E-cigarettes can help them transition off of cigarettes, which is why there's tension about this. But be clear, e-cigarettes, and in some cases, can contain higher nicotine levels than those traditional cigarettes. And so even an e-cigarette can pose risks, cardiovascular risks, that's heart effects, lung injury risks. It can also cause mental health risk. And so we are seeing more and more accumulating evidence that the e-cigarette risk is just as dangerous as kind of what I'd call traditional cigarettes, and that people should really take caution, not seeing those e-cigarettes in all of its many forms as something that we can actually use safely. And especially, it's not just youth and teens. We're seeing a remarkable rise in women. We're seeing a rise across many ages of the use of e-cigarettes, and not just a flavored product. So our science is telling us that this is, in fact, damaging, It's dangerous and highly addictive. So be very careful, and especially for any adults that are using this to transition off of traditional cigarettes, talk with your doctor about setting up a plan and having some of the other things that we can use to help people stop smoking.
Always good advice, Dr. Kavita Patel. Thank you so much. Welcome back. Let's get to some financial headlines now. The legal battle over so-called forever chemicals has come to an expensive end.
CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us now with the details. Good morning, Silvana.
Good morning, Valerie. Good morning, Joe. Yeah, so 3M has agreed to pay more than $10 billion to settle thousands of lawsuits claiming so-called forever chemicals made by the company contaminated drinking water across the country. Now, 3M will disperse the funds over a 13-year period to cities, towns, and public water suppliers to detect and treat the chemicals known as PFAs. These are used in nonstick, water and grease-resistant products such as clothes and cookware and have been linked to a number of health problems. GlaxoSmithKline has reached a settlement in a U.S. lawsuit over claims its heartburn drug Zantac caused cancer. The cause, brought by a California resident, was set to go to trial next month. Now, Zantac was one of the first drugs to ever top $1 billion in annual sales. And in 2019, some manufacturers and pharmacies halted sales over concerns. Its active ingredient degraded over time to form a carcinogen that could cause cancer in large amounts. The FDA pulled all remaining brands and generic versions in 2020. And Singapore is hosting the first ever Olympic eSports Week with more than 100 athletes competing across 10 events. Now, those include mobile archery, virtual cycling, and taekwondo. The global esports market was valued at about $1.4 billion last year, reaching an audience of more than $500 million. Now, an audience of more than 500 million. And Southeast Asia is among the world's fastest growth esports markets, guys.
That is the first time I've seen virtual taekwondo before. It's
There's no
virtual archery, taekwondo.
Like a little dancing. All right.
Yeah.
Silvana, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Now to a new report that shows that more people than ever are planning for their future by investing in 401k plans.
Asset management firm Vanguard says its clients' participation in 401k plans is at an all-time high. Vanguard also says the amount of employers offering automatic enrollment in 401k plans has more than tripled since 2007.
But it seems that when people change jobs, sometimes they're forgetting to take these retirement savings accounts with them. It's being called the forgotten 401k accounts, and it could cause you to potentially lose out on your hard-earned savings.
Gaurav Sharma is the CEO and co-founder of Capitalize and joins us now. Gaurav, good to have you on with us. So if you change jobs and you have a 401k with your old employer, those savings don't automatically travel with you when you leave that job. What options do you have?
Yep, you're exactly right, Valerie. Thanks for having me. So at Capitalize, our mission is to help people save for retirement. And one of the ways that we do that is we make sure that they can find and consolidate their old 401k. So let's talk about the 401k. As you point out, it's a great vehicle. More people than ever are using it to save for their retirement. The problem is that when we change jobs, those assets don't automatically get transferred. And so we have a series of options, right? Option number one is we can cash out or withdraw that money. That's generally not a good idea because we pay taxes and penalties on that money. The second thing that we can do, which millions of Americans do, is we can roll over or transfer those assets into a new retirement account, like a new 401k or a new IRA. That's generally a pretty good option. The third thing that many of us do is we leave those 401ks behind and unfortunately can forget about them. And so our research that we released last week showed just how many people are doing that. There's 29 million forgotten 401ks now in the US with $1.65 trillion of assets in them. So that's 20% of all 401k dollars have been left behind. And there are a whole bunch of problems associated with this.
Yeah, that is mind-blowing to me. I know in my career, I've changed jobs a few times. I've always rolled over my 401k. It takes a little bit of work, but not too much. You obviously did a detailed analysis on this forgotten 401ks trend. Why is it so many people are leaving those savings behind? And remind us the consequences if you fail to roll over your 401k for the consumers, but also the employers.
Yep, exactly. So look, we think there are two main drivers of what we call the forgotten 401k phenomenon, right? One of those is just unavoidable, and the other is very solvable from our perspective. The first is that people are changing jobs quite a lot, right? So if you think about the Great Resignation over the past 24 months, 2021, 2022 saw very elevated levels of job changing. Almost 50 million Americans changed jobs. And so obviously the pool of people who are changing jobs and have something to do with their 401k is growing. The second reason we think people are leaving behind their 401ks at growing rates is that rollover process you mentioned, right? It is actually a pretty cumbersome, old school manual experience for a lot of folks, right? Where it historically has involved phone calls, paper checks, faxes, form, etc. And so that is one of the things actually at Capitalize that we're trying to fix. We're trying to digitize that process so that fewer people leave their money behind.
Gaurav,
as far as the consequences, yeah, go.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, as far as the consequences of this go, look, a couple of things to keep in mind. One, these aren't small sums of money. So the average forgotten 401k is about $56,000, right? So these aren't small sums. The second thing is that we continue to pay fees inside of those 401ks. And so those fees can accrue over time and really eat away at our retirement savings. The third is that the returns may end up being lower than if that money was consolidated and in one place. And so the consequences of that are you could be foregoing, several $100,000 in retirement savings over the course of your career.
So important not to leave that money behind. Gaurav Sharma, thank you so much. The 2023 NBA draft is officially in the books, and perhaps no team scored bigger than the San Antonio Spurs. And we mean bigger. Their number one pick was, of course, 7'5" French phenom Victor Wembanyama. Brandon Miller of Alabama went second to the Charlotte Hornets, and G League star Scoot Henderson is heading to the Portland Trail Blazers to round out the top three. But that's not all. The 4 and 5 picks were the Thompson twins, Eamon and Osar. Their selections marked the first time ever that two brothers were taken in the first 5 picks of the draft. Congratulations to all those young and very talented athletes.
Very cool for them.
Finally, this hour, from sports to the silver screen, it's Friday, which means it's time for your can't miss list.
That's all the movies and shows that you need to see this weekend. Joining us now to help guide us through, Chris Witherspoon, the founder and CEO of Pop Viewers and an NBC News entertainment contributor. You were nervous you're going to have to talk about basketball there for a second, weren't you?
Don't get me started with that.
We're going to talk movies because there's 2 releases this weekend folks are talking about. There's a rom-com that some might say is a little bit raunchy with an Oscar winner. And then we've got an all-female action movie. So no hard feelings, Sheroes.
Yeah, so the first one's No Hard Feelings, and follow this under A Girl's Gotta Do What a Girl's Gotta Do. So Jennifer Lawrence plays an Uber driver who's about to lose her childhood home. So she agrees to date a rich couple's shy, awkward 19-year-old son for some cash and bring him out of his shell. And this plot is based on a real Craigslist ad. This actually really happened in real life. And Jennifer Lawrence, she's a producer. This is her first and only film in 2023, which is kind of crazy. Then the other film is called Sheroes. It's a mystery adventure. And this one is also these girls who want to go on this amazing trip to Thailand, dream trip, all the Instagram fills. But one of their friends is captured by a drug lord. And this drug lord doesn't realize that they just aren't pretty girls, but they're highly trained killers. So this cute vacation turns into a battle for survival. It's kind of like Taken, but instead of Liam Neeson, it's like Liam Neeson. It's these 3 guys that can fight.
A set of skills.
Yes, they have that set of skills, yes.
I am just realizing the Jennifer Lawrence movie, the kid who's in that, I interviewed a few years ago because he was in Dear Evan Hansen.
Oh, wow.
He was an actual
on Broadway?
16-year-old playing the role of Dear Evan Hansen as a teenager. He was the first young person to do that. Interesting.
Okay.
All right.
This is a grown-up role for him. It's raunchy.
I was going to say,
he grew up.
No Dear Evan Hansen here. All right.
All right, so if you're staying in, there are 2 shows to keep your eye on if you are a fan of Sex and the City. Kim Cattrall is in something new called Glamorous. But first of all, let's talk about And Just Like That.
Okay, I've been watching y'all. It came out on Thursday. Season 2 is back. And we're really catching up with Charlotte, with Carrie, with Miranda, all where they kind of left off, navigating love life in their 50s. But supporting characters are really shining this season. Nicole Ari Parker, Karen Pittman, Sarita Chowdhury, and Shay Diaz, who everyone loves, Sarah Ramirez. But also, Kim Cattrall is back. She'll be in just 1 episode, 1 scene, so don't get too hyped.
It's at the
but
end,
I think
too,
it's
right?
at the end, I believe. But this was HBO Max's #1 show when it first came out, highest rated show. So folks are watching right now. And it's not disappointing. Season 2 is pretty good. And the other show, you guys, is called Glamorous. It's a 10-episode drama comedy about a young, gender non-conforming queer person who's making waves on social media as an influencer for makeup. So he lands a job working for a legendary makeup mogul played by Kim Cattrall. You see her right there. So it's kind of like Devil Wears Prada, but it's also like kind of that makeup vibe to it all. But Kim says she signed on because she became such a huge fan of Miss Spinny. the non-conforming actor.
Very
in the
cool.
show.
All right. Finally, speaking of fashion, there's a fun fashion-themed rom-com, and you had a chance to actually go on the red carpet, right? Which I bet was quite the red carpet,
so exciting.
right?
Yes, it's called The Perfect Find. This is Gabrielle Union. She's getting her groove back on screen. So she plays Jenna Jones, a 40-year-old fashion editor who's trying to make a career comeback, but she falls in love with her much younger co-worker who happens to be her boss's son. So she has to decide whether or not to risk it all for her lover. But it stars Keith Powers, Gina Torres, and Janet Hubert, who I got to attend the red carpet in the premiere last week with Janet Hubert. It was amazing. The cast has such great chemistry. And I think it's one of those rom-coms we don't get often with like the older lady and the younger guy.
Yeah.
It'll have you talking.
Which is
a lot of crazy
change.
scenes.
So you saw it, you enjoyed it?
So much great fashion too in this movie.
Yeah. All right. Very good. All right, Chris. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to all that. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.